The hammer came down hard on the wooden block, and the sound cracked through the trade yard like a gunshot. My hands were bound. My children were pressed against my legs, shaking, and I could not even lift my arms to hold them. I am Graskana. I was standing on an auction platform under a burning orange sky, and men with cold eyes were shouting numbers at each other like I was a sack of grain. 200. That is what I was worth to them. Let me take you back a little, so you understand how a mother ends up chained on a wooden platform, waiting to hear a stranger decide her fate. My clan lost our home 3 seasons ago. The war between the outer colonies and the mining syndicates burned through our valley like fire through dry grass. My mate did not survive the retreat. I do not want to speak of that day. I carried my 3 children through the ash fields for 11 days, eating bark, drinking rainwater, until we reached the human settlement of Dunmore Ridge. I thought humans would help us. Instead, we were processed. That is the word they used. Processed. Like fruit going into a can. The labor brokers took one look at us and smiled the way a hunter smiles at wounded prey. Orc labor was in high demand on the frontier worlds. Strong backs, they said. Good for mining, good for hauling, good for anything that broke human bodies too fast. They did not care that I had been a healer in my clan. They did not care that my eldest son could read 3 languages. All they saw was muscle and a price tag. I was given a number. My children were given numbers. We were loaded onto a transport with 40 other orcs and shipped to this colony. A dusty outpost called Holloway Station, built on the edge of nothing, surrounded by red dirt and broken promises. That is where I stood now, on the auction block, waiting. The auctioneer, a thin man named Grady Whitlock, kept glancing at me with irritation. I was not a good sale. I had no combat rating. I was not young, and worst of all, in the eyes of these buyers, I came with 3 children attached to me, which meant 3 extra mouths to feed for whoever bought me. Strong female, capable of manual labor, Grady called out, reading from his datapad without looking up. Comes with offspring. Buyer assumes responsibility for all 4. Nobody wanted 4. Nobody wanted a mother with children clinging to her like burrs. The bidding for the orcs before me had gone into the thousands. Big men with combat scars, young orcs still strong enough for the mines. They went fast, and the numbers flew high. But when it was my turn, the crowd went quiet. A few men laughed. Someone shouted a number that was clearly meant as an insult more than a bid. I stood there and I felt something inside me go numb, the way ice forms over a lake, sealing everything beneath it. I told myself I would not cry in front of these people. I would not give them that. Then a voice from the back of the crowd said, 200. The crowd laughed harder. Grady Whitlock actually smiled, relieved, I think, to finally close out this lot and move on to something more profitable. Going once, going twice. He barely paused. Sold, to the man in the brown coat. I did not even see who had bought me. My youngest, Tavi, was crying into my sleeve, and I was trying to hold my 2 other children steady with my bound hands, and my mind was already racing through every terrible possibility. A mine, a quarry, somewhere far worse than this dusty station. A man walked up through the crowd toward the platform. He was not what I expected. He was not broad or hard-eyed like the brokers. He wore simple work clothes, dusty boots, and a coat that had clearly been mended more than once. He looked, if anything, a little embarrassed, like he had not meant to draw so much attention. He climbed the steps to where I stood, and for the first time since we arrived at Holloway Station, someone looked directly into my eyes instead of scanning me like cargo. I'm Callum, he said quietly. Callum Ashford. I run a farm about 10 miles out. He glanced at my children, then back at me. What's your name? I stared at him. Nobody had asked me that in 3 seasons. Graskana, I said, my voice rough from disuse. Graskana, he repeated, like he was making sure he got it right. All right, let's get you and your kids out of the sun. I did not trust him. Of course I did not trust him. Kindness on an auction block is usually just a different kind of trap. I had heard stories from other orcs, stories of buyers who were gentle in public and cruel behind closed doors. Buyers who wanted obedience wrapped in a smile so they could feel good about themselves while still owning another living being. So when Callum led us to his transport, an old dust-covered truck with a cracked windshield, I climbed in with my children, and I watched him carefully, waiting for the mask to slip. It never did. The drive to his farm took almost an hour, bouncing over red dirt roads under a sky turning the color of rust. My children stayed pressed against me, silent, watchful. Callum did not try to make conversation. He seemed to understand that we needed quiet more than we needed small talk. When we arrived, I expected a labor camp, fences, a supervisor. Instead, I saw a modest farmhouse, a barn leaning slightly to one side, fields of green stretching toward the horizon, and a small stream cutting through the property. "This is home," Callum said, stepping out of the truck. "Yours too. For now. There's a room in the back of the house. Used to be my sister's before she moved to the capital. It's got 2 beds. I'll figure out sleeping for the little one." I stood frozen by the truck. "You are giving us a room? In your house?" Callum frowned, like the question confused him. "Where else would you sleep?" I did not have an answer for that. Every orc I had spoken to since the war ended slept in barracks, or sheds, or sometimes in the open. A room in the buyer's own house was not something I had heard of. That first night, he showed us the small room, gave us blankets, and brought us a simple meal of bread, dried meat, and vegetables from his garden. He set the plates down and then, before I could stop him, he served my children first. I watched him do this, and something cracked inside the ice I had built around myself. I did not understand this man. I did not understand why a human who had paid $200 for a family of orcs would treat us like guests instead of property. Over the following days, I waited for the trap to reveal itself. I waited for him to demand something from me that I would not want to give. I waited for the moment his patience would run out, and the true nature of ownership would show its teeth. Instead, he asked me what work I was good at. "I do not understand," I told him, standing in the barn while he repaired a broken fence post. "You bought me. You tell me what to do." Callum shook his head. "That's not how I want to run things here. You know things I don't. Maybe you're good with animals. Maybe you know crops. Maybe you'd rather work with your hands building things. I'd rather ask than guess." I told him, cautiously, that I had been a healer among my people, skilled with herbs and wounds and the sicknesses that come from bad water and hard labor. His eyebrows rose. "We could use that," he said. "My last 2 hired hands both got sick from something in the West Field last spring, and the nearest doctor is 2 days away. You'd be doing me a favor." A favor, as if I were the one giving something valuable, not the other way around. Weeks passed, and the fear in me slowly, cautiously, began to loosen its grip. Callum paid me an actual wage, small but real, money placed directly into my hands at the end of each week, though colony law did not require him to pay indentured orc labor anything beyond food and shelter. When I asked him why, he simply said it did not feel right to work someone without paying them, no matter what the law allowed. My children began to laugh again. My eldest son Bram started helping in the fields and asking Callum questions about the farm equipment, the kind of curious questions that had once made him a favorite among our clan's elders. My daughter Nessa found a stray dog near the stream, and Callum let her keep it, even though he grumbled about extra mouths to feed. My youngest, Tavi, who had cried through most of our journey to this world, began following Callum around the farm like a small, devoted shadow. But not everyone in Halloway Station shared Callum's way of seeing things. One afternoon, we went into town together to trade some of our harvest for supplies. I stood near the wagon while Callum spoke with the shopkeeper, and I heard the whispers start almost immediately. Men gathered near the general store, glancing at me, muttering words I had heard too many times before, words that reduced me to less than a person. One man, broader than Callum and clearly used to getting his way, stepped forward and spat near my feet. "Didn't think Ashford was the type to bring his orc pet into town like she's a person," he sneered, loud enough for the whole street to hear. Something in me wanted to shrink, to disappear, the way I had trained myself to do since the auction block. But before I could react, Callum was already walking toward the man, his posture calm but firm. "Her name is Grascana," Callum said, his voice steady, "and she works this town's harvest just as much as any of us. You've got a problem with that, you can take it up with me." The man laughed, but there was less confidence in it now. "You're going soft, Ashford. Orcs aren't people. Everyone knows that." "Funny," Callum said. "She's raised 3 kids through a war, kept my farm from failing after the drought, and hasn't complained once about a $200 price tag some idiot slapped on her at auction. Doesn't sound like something less than a person to me." The man muttered something under his breath and walked away. I stood there, stunned, watching Callum return to loading the wagon like nothing unusual had happened. "You did not need to do that," I told him quietly. "Yes, I did," he said, not looking up from the crates. "Doesn't matter what the law says about you. I know what's true, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to keep peace with people like him." That night, lying awake in the small room with my children breathing steadily beside me, I found myself thinking about the word home for the first time in 3 seasons. I should have known peace like that could not last on this frontier. About 4 months after the auction, a transport rolled onto Callum's property, kicking up dust that could be seen from half a mile away. I recognized the insignia on the side immediately, and my stomach dropped. It belonged to the labor brokerage that had processed my family at Dunmore Ridge. A tall woman stepped out, dressed in the crisp gray uniform of a colonial labor auditor. Her name badge read Ferris. She carried a data pad and wore the kind of professional smile that made my skin crawl. "Mr. Ashford," she said, striding toward the porch where Callum stood, "we have a discrepancy in the auction records from Halloway Station that needs to be corrected." Callum crossed his arms. "What kind of discrepancy?" Ferris tapped her data pad. "The female orc and her offspring you purchased were originally part of a package lot, intended to be sold alongside a combat-rated male. Records show the male died during transport, which means the female's valuation was processed incorrectly. She should have been priced according to her breeding value and labor potential as an individual asset, not sold as damaged package leftover for $200. My blood ran cold. I understood exactly what she was saying, even through the cold clinical language. She was saying I had been sold too cheap, and now they wanted to fix that mistake by taking me and my children away to be sold again, this time for a price that would guarantee whoever bought us would see us purely as an investment to be worked as hard as possible. "So what happens now?" Callum asked, his voice tight. "The brokerage requires the contract to be voided and the assets returned for proper re-auction," Ferris said, as if she were discussing a shipment of grain rather than my family's future. "You'll be refunded your original $200, of course." I felt Nessa's hand grip mine so tightly it hurt. Bram stepped closer, placing himself slightly in front of his younger siblings, though I could see the fear in his eyes even as he tried to look brave. Callum did not move from the porch. "No." Ferris blinked, clearly not used to hearing that word. "Mr. Ashford, this is not a request. The brokerage contract you signed included a clause allowing reassessment in cases of processing error." "I read that contract twice before I signed it," Callum said, "and I've spent the last 2 months buying out every remaining clause in it, piece by piece, from your regional office. Graskana and her children aren't under a brokerage contract anymore. They're free." I turned to stare at him, certain I had misheard. Ferris's confident expression faltered for the first time. She scrolled through her data pad, frowning. "That paperwork would need to be verified through the Colonial Magistrate's office." "Then verify it," Callum said. "Because I already filed the manumission papers 3 weeks ago, and I've got a hearing scheduled with Magistrate Okonkwo next Tuesday to make sure it's recognized permanently, for Graskana, and for every orc family caught in the same kind of loophole you're trying to use right now." I did not know what to say. I did not even know such a thing was possible. Manumission. Freedom. Made legal. Made permanent. Filed in a colonial court where it could not be quietly erased by a broker with a data pad and a smile. Ferris left that day with far less confidence than she arrived with, muttering something about escalating the matter through proper channels. I watched her transport disappear down the dusty road, and then I turned to Callum, my hands trembling. "You did this, weeks ago, without telling me." "I didn't want to get your hopes up in case it didn't work," Callum admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "The colonial laws around labor contracts are a mess, and I wasn't sure the magistrate would even hear the case. Figured it was better to try quietly than promise something I couldn't deliver." The hearing that following Tuesday was unlike anything I had experienced since arriving in this system. The courthouse in Halloway Station was small, more of a converted meeting hall than an actual court, but it was packed. Word had spread through the colony, and orcs from nearby farms and mining operations had come to watch, some with hope in their eyes, most with the guarded caution of people who had learned not to expect good outcomes from human institutions. Magistrate Okonkwo, an older woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness that Callum had assured me was well earned, listened as the brokerage's lawyer argued that voiding my contract set a dangerous precedent, that orc labor contracts were the backbone of the colony's agricultural output. That sentiment had no place in labor law. Then it was Callum's turn to speak. He was not a polished speaker. He stumbled over a few words, glanced down at his notes more than once, but his voice grew steadier as he spoke about watching me heal sick farm hands with nothing but herbs and patience, about my children working the fields not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to help build something that was becoming their home too, about the simple, undeniable fact that no auction price could measure the worth of a person. "You can put a number on a sack of grain," Callum said, looking directly at the magistrate. "You cannot put a number on a mother who walked 11 days through ash fields to keep her children alive. $200 was never her value. It was just the number some broken system landed on because it didn't know how to see her clearly." The room was silent when he finished. Magistrate Okonkwo turned to me then and asked if I wished to speak. Orcs did not typically address human courts directly. It was not forbidden exactly, but it was not expected either, and I saw the brokerage's lawyers shift uncomfortably at the mere suggestion. I stood anyway. I spoke about my clan, about the healer's training I had carried since I was younger than my own daughter, about the war that took everything except my children and my will to protect them. I spoke about the auction block, about being reduced to a number, and about the strange, unexpected mercy of a quiet farmer who asked my name before he asked anything else of me. I am not a mistake in your paperwork, I told the magistrate, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I am not damaged goods needing correction. I am a mother and a healer, and I would like the chance to build a life for my children that no auction block can take away again. The magistrate's ruling came 2 days later. My manumission was recognized in full, permanent, and unchallengeable. More than that, Magistrate Okonkwo cited our case in a broader ruling that extended protections to Orc family units across the colony, closing the exact loophole the brokerage had tried to use against us. It would not fix everything. There were still auction blocks in other stations, still brokers looking for new gaps in the law to exploit. But it was a beginning, and beginnings matter more than people often realize. Now, months later, I stand in the same fields where I once feared I would be worked until I broke. Except now the land is not something I merely labor upon. Callum insisted on drawing up papers making me a partner in the farm, splitting the harvest and the decisions between us, something unheard of on this frontier. My children run freely across the fields, Tavi chasing Nessa's dog through the tall grass, Bram learning to repair machinery with the kind of focused determination that reminds me so much of his father. I think often about that day on the auction block, about the number that was supposed to define my worth, $200. I used to think that number was an insult, a measurement of how little the world thought I mattered. I understand it differently now. That number was never about my value. It was about the broken system that produced it, a system that measured mothers and healers and children the same way it measured tools and livestock. What changed my family's future was not a price. It was a person, one quiet, stubborn human, who looked past a number on a datapad and simply asked my name. That question, more than any hearing or ruling or law, was the true beginning of everything that came after.